I never thought buying my dream property would turn into a legal nightmare, but standing in my cornfield, watching a woman in a white visor wave a citation at me like it was a weapon, changed everything. My name is Zachary Young, and 6 months ago I purchased 15 acres of prime agricultural land just outside Salinas, California. The property came with rich soil, a modest farmhouse that needed work, and most importantly, proper zoning. Agricultural zoning, the kind that meant I could finally pursue my dream of running a small organic farm. I had left my corporate job in San Francisco, cashed out my savings, and committed fully to this new life. The land had been farmed before, though it sat fallow for a few years after the previous owner retired. I spent weeks preparing the soil, consulting with local agricultural experts, and planning my crop rotation. By spring, I had corn, tomatoes, squash, and a small orchard of fruit trees getting established. Everything was perfect until Patricia Morrison showed up. It was a Tuesday morning in late April when I first met her. I was out checking irrigation lines when I heard a car door slam. Looking up, I saw a silver Lexus SUV parked in my driveway and a woman in her mid-50s marching toward me with the kind of determined stride that spelled trouble. She wore crisp white pants, a pink polo shirt, and oversized sunglasses that probably cost more than my tractor payment. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the morning air. "Are you the owner of this property?" I straightened up, wiping dirt from my hands. "That would be me. Zachary Young. Can I help you?" She stopped a few feet away, looking around at my crops with an expression like she had just stepped in something unpleasant. "I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here because we've received multiple complaints about your activities here." I frowned. "My farming activities? This is agricultural land. I'm farming it." "That's exactly the problem," Patricia said, pulling a folder from her designer handbag. "Meadowbrook Estates maintains certain aesthetic standards for this area. Your farming operation is creating visual blight, odors, and increased traffic that negatively impacts property values in our community." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "Your community is a quarter-mile down the road. This is my property, legally zoned for agriculture. I'm not part of any HOA. Your property borders our development," she countered, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my jaw clench. "And while you may not technically be a member of our association, your activities still affect our residents. We have standards to maintain." "Standards," I repeated slowly. "For land that isn't yours and isn't part of your HOA." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm trying to be neighborly here, Mr. Young. I'm giving you the courtesy of a warning before we take formal action. You need to cease all farming operations immediately. The corn needs to go. The vegetables need to go. This land should be maintained as natural open space or, at minimum, a landscaped lawn." The absurdity of her demand hit me like a physical force. "You want me to tear out my crops and plant grass on agricultural land? I want you to be a responsible neighbor and respect the community standards we've worked hard to establish." She pulled a document from her folder and held it out. "This is a formal notice of violation. You have 30 days to comply." I didn't take the paper. "I'm not part of your HOA. You have no authority over my property." "We'll see about that," Patricia said coldly. She dropped the paper at my feet and turned on her heel, marching back to her Lexus. Moments later, she was gone, leaving a cloud of dust and the beginning of what would become the most frustrating fight of my life. I picked up the document and read through it, my disbelief growing with every paragraph. The notice cited violations of community agricultural prohibition standards and referenced covenant restrictions that apparently extended to buffer properties adjacent to Meadowbrook Estates. It was complete nonsense. I had done my due diligence before buying this land. I had checked the zoning, reviewed property records, and confirmed there were no restrictions on agricultural use. The previous owner had farmed here for 30 years. That evening, I dug out all my property documents and spent hours reviewing every page. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, that gave any HOA authority over my land. My property deed was clear. The zoning was clear. I wasn't part of Meadowbrook Estates, had never signed any HOA agreement, and my land had been agricultural long before their development existed. I figured that would be the end of it. Patricia would realize she had no legal standing and back off. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home from a supply run to find a cease and desist letter taped to my front door. This one was on law firm letterhead, Morrison and Associates, attorneys at law. I had to read the return address twice before I realized the connection. Patricia Morrison wasn't just HOA president. She was also a lawyer, or at least her family ran a law firm, and she was using it to threaten me. The letter demanded immediate cessation of all agricultural activities and threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 15 days. It cited California nuisance laws, property devaluation, and claimed my farming created excessive dust, noise, and odors that constituted a public disturbance. I called the county planning department the next morning. A helpful clerk named Susan looked up my property records while I waited on hold, listening to tinny elevator music. "Mr. Young," she came back on the line, "your property is definitely zoned AG20, agricultural with a 20-acre minimum. Has been since 1967. You're well within your rights to farm there." "That's what I thought," I said, relief washing over me. "Can you send me documentation confirming that? I'm dealing with some HOA trouble," Susan sighed knowingly. "Let me guess. Meadowbrook Estates? You've dealt with them before? They call here about once a month with some complaint or another, usually about properties that aren't even in their jurisdiction. I'll email you the zoning confirmation right now." Armed with official documentation, I drafted a response to Patricia's law firm. I kept it professional, but firm, explaining that my property was properly zoned for agricultural use. I had every legal right to farm it, and any further harassment would be documented for potential legal action of my own. I thought that would end it. It didn't. 3 days after I sent my response, I woke to the sound of diesel engines. Stumbling outside in my pajama pants and a t-shirt, I found 2 county code enforcement trucks in my driveway and 3 inspectors walking through my fields. "What the hell's going on?" I called out, jogging toward them. A balding man in a county uniform turned to me, clipboard in hand. "Are you Zachary Young?" "Yes, this is my property. What are you doing here?" "We received complaints about unpermitted agricultural structures, potential water violations, and pesticide use concerns. We're here to conduct an inspection." My stomach dropped. I don't use pesticides. Everything I grow is organic. And what structures? I haven't built anything except some basic trellises. "We still need to verify compliance with county regulations," he said, not unkindly. "This will take a few hours. Do you have documentation of your water usage and soil amendments?" I spent the entire morning following the inspectors around, answering questions and providing documentation for everything they asked about. My irrigation system was legal. My water usage was within permitted limits for agricultural property. I had no illegal structures. My composting operation met all setback requirements. After 4 hours, they found exactly nothing wrong. The lead inspector handed me a clipboard. "Sign here acknowledging the inspection. We found no violations. You're operating within regulations." "Who filed the complaints?" I asked, though I already knew. He glanced at his paperwork. "Patricia Morrison, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA. She's filed 3 separate complaints in the past week." "She has no authority over my property," I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. "We have to investigate all complaints," he said sympathetically. "But I'll note in my report that this is an ongoing dispute and your operation is fully compliant. If she keeps filing frivolous complaints, she could face penalties for wasting county resources." That should have discouraged her. Instead, Patricia escalated. Over the next month, I faced a relentless barrage of harassment. She filed noise complaints with the sheriff, claiming my tractor violated noise ordinances at 6 in the morning, even though agricultural equipment was specifically exempted. She reported me to the State Water Board for alleged illegal well usage, triggering another inspection that found nothing wrong. She even called the health department, claiming my compost operation was a biohazard, which resulted in yet another fruitless inspection. Each complaint meant hours of my time wasted dealing with inspectors, gathering documentation, and defending my legal right to farm my own property. The stress was eating away at me, affecting my sleep and my ability to focus on the actual work of running the farm. The worst part was that she wasn't just targeting me with bureaucratic harassment. She started a campaign in Meadowbrook Estates to turn my neighbors against me. I started getting dirty looks when I went into town. Someone left a nasty note on my truck windshield, calling me a selfish jerk, ruining the neighborhood. A local farm supply store owner mentioned that several Meadowbrook residents had complained about selling to me, though he assured me my business was still welcome. It came to a head on a hot afternoon in early June. I was harvesting early corn when Patricia's Lexus pulled up again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had brought 5 other people with her, all wearing matching Meadowbrook Estates HOA polo shirts. They lined up at the edge of my field like a suburban firing squad. Patricia stepped forward with a megaphone. "Zachary Young," her amplified voice boomed across my farm. "You are in violation of Meadowbrook Estates community standards. We demand you cease farming operations immediately and restore this land to its natural state." I walked toward them, corn ears still in my hands, trying to keep my temper in check. "Patricia, this is getting ridiculous. You have no authority here. Please leave my property." "We represent the will of this community," she declared dramatically, still using the megaphone even though I was now only 20 feet away. "Your selfish pursuit of profit is destroying our quality of life." "I'm farming legally zoned agricultural land," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Every single complaint you've filed has been investigated and found to be baseless. You're harassing me." One of the other HOA members, a man in his 60s with a red face, stepped forward. "You're bringing down our property values. My house has lost $50,000 in value since you started this operation." "That's impossible," I shot back. "The real estate market has been going up and I've been farming for 4 months. There's no way you've had your property appraised in that time." "We had a professional assessment done," Patricia interjected. "Your farming operation is categorized as a nuisance that directly impacts surrounding property values." "By who? Some appraiser you paid to say what you wanted?" I was done trying to be reasonable. "Get off my property, all of you, now." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We tried to resolve this amicably. You've left us no choice but to pursue legal action. You'll be hearing from our attorneys." "I've already heard from your attorneys," I said, "multiple times, and I'm documenting every instance of harassment, so please, keep it coming." They left, but Patricia's threat wasn't empty. 3 days later, I was served with a lawsuit. Morrison and Associates, on behalf of Meadowbrook Estates HOA, was suing me for creating a private nuisance, seeking injunctive relief to halt all farming operations and monetary damages for alleged property devaluation. I sat in my kitchen that evening, lawsuit papers spread across the table, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on me. I couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. My savings had gone into buying and establishing the farm. Fighting a lawsuit, even one I would likely win, could bankrupt me. That's when I remembered something my uncle had told me years ago. He had worked for the California Department of Food and Agriculture for decades before retiring. He had mentioned once that the state had protections for agricultural operations, specifically to prevent this exact kind of harassment. I called him that night. "Uncle Frank, I need your help. I'm being sued for farming on agricultural land." After I explained the situation, Frank was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You need to contact the California State Agriculture Board. There are right-to-farm laws specifically designed to protect legitimate agricultural operations from nuisance lawsuits. If your land is properly zoned and you're farming according to standard practices, they should be able to intervene." "Can they really stop a lawsuit?" "They can do more than that," Frank said. "They can investigate whether the HOA is violating state agricultural protection laws. HOAs have been sued for this kind of overreach before. Let me send you the contact information." The next morning, I called the State Agriculture Board. I was transferred twice before reaching someone in their Agricultural Protection Division. I explained my situation to a woman named Jennifer, who listened carefully, asking occasional clarifying questions. "Mr. Young," she said when I finished, "what you're describing sounds like a clear case of right-to-farm violation. Can you email me your property documentation, zoning confirmation, and copies of the HOA's complaints and lawsuit?" "Absolutely. How long does an investigation usually take?" "That depends on the complexity, but given what you've told me, this sounds fairly straightforward." I can probably have someone out to your property within the week." I felt hope for the first time in weeks. I gathered all my documentation that afternoon and sent everything to Jennifer. 2 days later, she called back. "Mr. Young, I've reviewed your materials and consulted with our legal team. Your property is undeniably agricultural, properly zoned, and you're operating well within standard farming practices. The HOA's lawsuit appears to be a direct violation of California Civil Code Section 3482.5, our Right to Farm statute. We're opening a formal investigation." What does that mean exactly? It means we're going to contact the HOA and their legal representation, inform them of the investigation, and strongly suggest they withdraw their lawsuit. We'll also be looking into whether they've violated state laws protecting agricultural operations. If they persist, we can provide expert testimony supporting your case and potentially file our own action against the HOA for interfering with protected agricultural activities. The relief was overwhelming. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means. This is exactly what we're here for," Jennifer said warmly. "Agriculture is vital to California's economy and heritage. We don't take kindly to people trying to shut down legitimate farms." 3 days later, Patricia called me directly. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Did you sic the State Agriculture Board on us? I reported that your HOA was trying to shut down my legal agricultural operation," I said calmly, "which is exactly what you've been doing." "This is harassment," she hissed. "No, Patricia, what you've been doing to me for months is harassment. This is me using legal channels to protect my rights." She hung up without another word. But the HOA didn't back down. If anything, Patricia seemed to take the state's involvement as a personal challenge. The lawsuit continued. I received notification that they were seeking a preliminary injunction to halt my farming operations pending trial. I couldn't afford an attorney, but the Agriculture Board's intervention had given me resources. Jennifer connected me with a rural legal aid organization that specialized in agricultural law. They assigned my case to a young attorney named Marcus Chen, who reviewed everything with sharp, focused attention. "This is egregious," Marcus said during our first meeting at his modest office in Salinas. "The HOA has no standing whatsoever. Your property predates their development, you're properly zoned, and California right to farm laws are crystal clear. Judge should dismiss this immediately." "Should," I said. "But will they?" "I'll file a motion to dismiss based on right to farm protections. I'll also be requesting sanctions against the HOA and their attorneys for filing a frivolous lawsuit. And the Agriculture Board will be filing an amicus brief supporting our position." The hearing for the preliminary injunction was set for late July. As that date approached, Patricia's campaign against me intensified in ways I hadn't anticipated. She started showing up at my farm with concerned citizens from Meadowbrook Estates, standing just beyond my property line and filming my operations. They'd shout questions and accusations while I worked, trying to provoke reactions they could record. "How much pesticide are you spraying on those tomatoes?" someone would yell. "I don't use pesticides," I'd respond, trying to ignore them. "That's not what we heard. You're poisoning the water supply." It was exhausting and infuriating. I started documenting everything too, keeping a detailed log of every incident with dates, times, and photos. The harassment extended to anyone who did business with me. The local farmers market initially welcomed my produce, but after complaints from Patricia and several Meadowbrook residents, they suddenly found permit issues with my booth. A restaurant that had been buying my tomatoes called to apologetically cancel their order, explaining they'd received threats of boycotts from Meadowbrook residents. Patricia was trying to destroy my livelihood through economic pressure, even as the legal case proceeded. The preliminary injunction hearing arrived on a sweltering Tuesday in late July. The courthouse in Salinas was an imposing concrete building that felt like it was baking in the heat. Marcus met me outside, briefcase in hand and confidence in his expression. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be," I said, my stomach churning with nerves. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and austere. Patricia sat at the plaintiff's table with two attorneys in expensive suits. She looked immaculate in a navy dress, her expression radiating smug confidence. Judge Sandra Rodriguez entered, and we all stood. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority. "Let's proceed," she said, settling into her chair. "This is a hearing on plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction in the matter of Meadowbrook Estates HOA versus Zachary Young. Counsel for plaintiff, you may proceed." One of Patricia's attorneys, a silver-haired man named Robert Finch, stood and launched into his argument. He painted me as a reckless operator who had turned peaceful agricultural land into an industrial farming operation that created noise, dust, odors, and traffic. He claimed my activities constituted a nuisance that was damaging property values and quality of life for dozens of families. "Your Honor, the plaintiff seeks only reasonable restrictions to protect the community from the detrimental impacts of unrestricted commercial agricultural operations," Finch argued smoothly. "We're not asking Mr. Young to stop using his land. We're simply asking for reasonable limitations that balance his interests with those of the surrounding community." When Marcus stood to respond, his voice was clear and firm. "Your Honor, this lawsuit is a textbook example of why California enacted right-to-farm protections. Mr. Young owns property that has been zoned agricultural for nearly 60 years. He is farming according to standard practices, has violated no regulations, and has been subjected to months of harassment by an HOA that has zero legal authority over his land." Marcus presented the zoning documentation, the clean inspection reports from multiple county and state agencies, and the Agriculture Board's brief supporting my case. He methodically dismantled each of the HOA's claims, showing they were based on exaggerations and outright fabrications. The HOA claims excessive noise, yet Mr. Young operates a small tractor during normal daylight hours, which is standard for any farm. They claim odors, yet multiple inspections have found no violations. They claim traffic impacts, yet Mr. Young operates a small farm with minimal commercial vehicle access. Every single complaint they've filed with county agencies has been investigated and dismissed. Judge Rodriguez listened carefully, occasionally making notes. When both sides had finished their arguments, she sat back and looked directly at Patricia's attorney. "Mr. Finch, I've reviewed the case materials. Your client's property is not part of Mr. Young's HOA, correct?" "That's correct, Your Honor, but the impacts of his activities. And Mr. Young's property is zoned for agricultural use." "Yes, Your Honor, however." "And you're aware of California Civil Code, Section 3482.5, the Right to Farm statute?" Finch hesitated. "We are, Your Honor, but we believe the scope of Mr. Young's operations exceeds the protections of that statute." "Based on what evidence?" The judge's tone was sharp. "I see multiple inspection reports showing full compliance with agricultural regulations. I see documentation that farming has occurred on this property for decades. What I don't see is any evidence of nuisance beyond the say, so of your client, who appears to have decided she simply doesn't like having a farm near her development." "Your Honor, the property value impacts alone are speculative at best and irrelevant at worst." Judge Rodriguez interrupted. "Right-to-farm laws exist precisely because agricultural operations can and do affect nearby properties, but those effects are considered acceptable consequences of legitimate farming in properly zoned areas. That's the whole point of the statute." She turned to Marcus. "Counsel for defendant, you've filed a motion to dismiss with sanctions?" "Yes, Your Honor." "I'm granting the motion to dismiss. This lawsuit clearly falls under right-to-farm protections, and the plaintiff has no standing to restrict agricultural operations on property that is not part of their HOA and is properly zoned for such use." Judge Rodriguez looked at Patricia and her attorneys with an expression of clear disapproval. "As for sanctions, I'm taking that motion under consideration. I want briefing from both sides on whether this lawsuit constitutes harassment or abuse of process within 2 weeks." Patricia's face went red, but she said nothing. "The preliminary injunction is denied," the judge continued. "Mr. Young may continue his agricultural operations without restriction. This case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. We're adjourned." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that felt like vindication. I wanted to cheer, but I kept my composure until we were outside the courtroom. Marcus shook my hand firmly. That went about as well as it could have. Judge Rodriguez clearly saw through their tactics. What happens now with the sanctions? We'll file a brief documenting all the harassment, the frivolous complaints, and the economic damage they tried to inflict. The judge could order them to pay your legal fees and impose penalties for filing a baseless lawsuit. As we talked, Patricia stormed past us, her attorneys trailing behind. She shot me a look of pure venom but didn't say a word. I thought that would be the end of it. The HOA had lost decisively. Their lawsuit was dismissed. They had no legal avenue left to pursue. Surely Patricia would back off now. I was naive. 2 weeks after the hearing, I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of my dog Rusty barking frantically. Stumbling out of bed, I looked out the window and saw orange light flickering across my fields. My heart stopped. Fire. I ran outside in my boxers and boots, grabbing my phone to call 911 as I sprinted toward the flames. My cornfield was burning, flames racing through the dry stalks. I had irrigation equipment nearby. I started the pump and began spraying water, trying desperately to contain the blaze before it reached my other crops. Fire trucks arrived within 15 minutes, their sirens cutting through the night. Firefighters took over, and I stood back helplessly, watching weeks of work go up in smoke. It took them 40 minutes to fully extinguish the fire. By then, nearly 2 acres of my corn were destroyed. The fire chief, a grizzled man named Tom Patterson, walked over to me as his crew finished dousing hot spots. "Mr. Young, we need to talk about how this started." "I have no idea," I said, exhausted and covered in soot. I was asleep. My dog woke me up. "We found accelerant," Tom said grimly. "This wasn't an accident. Someone set this deliberately. I've already called the sheriff." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Arson. Someone had tried to burn down my farm. Sheriff's deputies arrived as dawn broke. They took my statement, photographed the scene, and collected evidence. Deputy Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you have any idea who might want to do this?" I hesitated, then said, "I've been in a dispute with the local HOA. They sued me to try to shut down my farm. We just won in court 2 weeks ago." Deputy Chen's expression shifted. "Meadowbrook Estates. You know about them?" "We've had dealings with their president before. Patricia Morrison. She's been involved in several disputes with neighbors over the years. Never anything criminal, though." She made a note. "We'll be investigating all possibilities, but that's certainly a lead worth following." Over the next few days, investigators interviewed neighbors and reviewed any security footage they could find. I didn't have cameras on my property, something I immediately rectified by installing a comprehensive system covering my fields and buildings. 3 days after the fire, Deputy Chen called me. "Mr. Young, can you come down to the station? We'd like to show you something." At the sheriff's station, she led me to a conference room with a laptop set up. "One of your neighbors, 3 properties down, has a security camera that covers their driveway. It caught something interesting around 2:30 the morning of the fire." She hit play. The footage was grainy and dark, but it clearly showed a vehicle driving slowly past without headlights. Deputy Chen paused and enhanced the image. Even with the poor quality, I could make out the distinctive shape of a Lexus SUV. "We ran the partial plate we could see," Deputy Chen said. "Registered to Patricia Morrison." My stomach tightened. "She actually drove out here and set my field on fire?" "We can't prove she did it yet. The vehicle is registered to her, but we need more evidence to charge anyone. We've requested her phone records to verify her location that night, and we're executing a search warrant on her vehicle for trace evidence of accelerant." "This is insane," I said, struggling to process it. "She burned my crops because she lost a lawsuit?" "If she did, she's looking at arson charges, which is a serious felony. We're taking this very seriously, Mr. Young." The investigation moved forward with thorough precision. Patricia initially claimed her vehicle had been stolen that night, but her story fell apart when phone records showed her phone pinging off towers along the route from her house to my farm and back at the exact time of the arson. Police found receipts in her vehicle for gasoline purchased in containers, and forensic analysis matched accelerant residue in her SUV to the accelerant used in my field. They arrested her on a Thursday afternoon. I wasn't there, but Deputy Chen called to let me know. We've charged Patricia Morrison with first-degree arson, criminal mischief, and stalking. She's being held on $50,000 bail." "Stalking?" I asked. "The months of harassment, the repeated unwanted contact, showing up at your property to film you. It meets the legal definition. The district attorney is throwing the book at her." The arrest made local news. HOA president arrested for arson ran the headline in the Salinas Californian. The article detailed the lawsuit, the harassment, and the fire. Public opinion turned swiftly and decisively against Patricia and Meadowbrook Estates. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. They also voted to formally apologize to me and drop any future opposition to my farm. A new board president, a reasonable woman named Ellen Martinez, called me personally. "Mr. Young, on behalf of Meadowbrook Estates, I want to apologize for everything you've endured. Patricia's actions were her own, but the board should have reined her in long ago. We have no issue with your farm and wish you success." "I appreciate that," I said, meaning it. "I never wanted conflict with your community. I just wanted to farm my land. We understand that now. If there's anything we can do to make amends, please let us know." The sanctions hearing for the dismissed lawsuit happened in September. Judge Rodriguez reviewed the documentation of harassment Marcus had compiled, including the arson that occurred after the case was dismissed. "This is one of the most egregious cases of HOA overreach I've encountered," she said from the bench. "Ms. Morrison's actions went far beyond overzealous advocacy into criminal harassment and ultimately arson. While her criminal actions are being addressed separately, this court finds that the lawsuit itself was filed in bad faith for purposes of harassment. She ordered the HOA to pay $40,000 to cover my legal fees and damages. She also issued a permanent injunction prohibiting Meadowbrook Estates HOA from filing any future complaints or legal actions against my farming operations." Patricia's criminal trial was set for January. The prosecution offered her a plea deal which she initially rejected, apparently still believing she could convince a jury she was justified. Her attorney eventually convinced her otherwise. She pleaded guilty to second-degree arson and stalking in exchange for the prosecution dropping the first-degree arson charge. The sentencing hearing was in February. I attended, sitting in the gallery as Patricia stood before Judge Michael Torres in criminal court. She looked diminished somehow, her usual arrogant confidence replaced with hollow defiance. The prosecutor laid out the case: months of harassment, multiple false complaints to government agencies, economic intimidation, and ultimately burning my crops in retaliation for losing in court. He recommended 3 years in state prison. Patricia's attorney argued for probation, claiming she had no prior criminal record and had suffered enough through the loss of her position and reputation. He painted her as someone who had simply cared too much about her community and made terrible decisions. Judge Torres was unmoved. "Ms. Morrison, you are an educated professional who used your position and resources to wage a campaign of harassment against a man whose only crime was farming land that was legally zoned for agriculture. When legal avenues failed, you resorted to arson, destroying another person's property and livelihood. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was months of escalating criminal behavior." He sentenced her to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution for my destroyed crops and legal fees, which totaled over $70,000. As deputies led her away, Patricia looked at me one last time. I expected anger, but what I saw was something closer to incomprehension, as if she still couldn't understand how trying to protect property values had landed her in prison. The aftermath of the legal battles stretched into spring. The farm had lost significant income from the destroyed corn, but insurance eventually paid out and the settlement from the HOA covered my losses and then some. I used the money to expand my operation, adding a greenhouse and additional irrigation infrastructure. Marcus became a friend beyond just being my attorney. He stopped by occasionally to see how things were progressing and even bought produce for his family. Jennifer from the Agriculture Board checked in as well, pleased that the case had resulted in such a clear vindication of right-to-farm protections. "Your case is actually being used as a training example now," she told me during one visit. We show it to local governments and HOAs to explain why they can't interfere with legitimate agricultural operations. Happy to be useful, I guess, I said with a laugh. The relationship with Meadowbrook Estates improved dramatically under new leadership. Ellen Martinez kept her word about staying out of my business, and the HOA focused on their own community rather than trying to control neighboring properties. Some residents even became regular customers at the farmers market when I finally got my booth permits straightened out. One unexpected positive came from all the news coverage. People showed up wanting to support a farm that had fought off HOA overreach. I started offering farm tours and eventually launched a small CSA program where members could buy shares of the harvest. The business grew beyond what I had initially imagined, not in spite of the conflict, but partly because of it. By late spring, more than a year after Patricia first showed up in my driveway, the farm was thriving. I stood in my fields one evening, watching the sun set over rows of tomatoes, corn, and squash. Fruit trees I had planted were beginning to establish themselves. The greenhouse was producing year-round greens. I had hired 2 part-time workers to help with harvest and distribution. Uncle Frank visited in April and walked the property with me, impressed by what I had built. "You could have given up a dozen times," he said. "Most people would have." I thought about it, I admitted, especially when she burned the crops. But this is my dream. I wasn't going to let anyone take it away. "The right to farm laws exist for exactly this reason," Frank said. "California has a long agricultural heritage. The state understands that farming sometimes conflicts with suburban development, but agriculture was here first and has legal protections for good reason." "I just wish I hadn't needed them," I said. "Unfortunately, you're not alone. Lots of farmers face this kind of pressure as cities expand, but you fought back and won, and that matters. You set a precedent that will help other farmers down the road." Marcus called me in May with final news. Patricia Morrison was released from prison last week. She served her full sentence with no early release due to disciplinary issues while incarcerated. Her probation terms include staying at least 500 yards from your property at all times. "Does she still live in Meadowbrook Estates?" I asked. "No, she sold her house and moved out of the area entirely. From what I heard, her reputation in the community was destroyed. Even her law firm partnership was dissolved. Last I heard, she moved to Oregon." "Good riddance," I said, and meant it. The farm continued growing through the summer. I expanded my crop varieties based on customer demand, added a small farm stand at the property entrance, and even started hosting farm-to-table dinners once a month that became surprisingly popular. People loved the story of the farm that fought back against HOA tyranny, and they loved supporting local agriculture. Deputy Chen stopped by one afternoon while I was harvesting tomatoes. She was off duty, in civilian clothes, and smiled when I looked up in surprise. "Hoping to buy some produce," she said. "Heard your tomatoes are amazing." "Best in the county," I said, leading her to the farm stand. "Help yourself." As she picked through the selection, she said, "I wanted you to know that your case changed some things in the department. We take HOA harassment complaints more seriously now. You weren't the first person to report problems with Patricia Morrison, but everyone before you had just given up or moved away. You standing your ground made a difference." "I had help," I said. "The Agriculture Board, Marcus, Judge Rodriguez. I couldn't have done it alone." "Maybe not, but you were the one willing to fight. That takes courage." She paid for her tomatoes and added, "Keep doing what you're doing. We need more farms like this." By autumn, I had fully settled into the rhythm of farm life. The early panic and chaos of fighting the HOA felt distant, like it had happened to someone else. My days were filled with the satisfying work of tending crops, managing harvest schedules, and building relationships with customers and other farmers in the area. The Salinas agricultural community had embraced me fully. I joined the local farmers cooperative, attended monthly meetings, and even spoke at a conference about navigating HOA conflicts. Other farmers shared their own stories of development pressure and legal challenges, creating a network of mutual support. One particularly satisfying moment came in October when a reporter from a California agriculture magazine interviewed me for a feature article about right-to-farm protections. The piece was titled "Standing Ground: How One Farmer Fought HOA Overreach and Won." It detailed the entire saga and included commentary from agricultural law experts about the importance of defending farming rights. Cases like Mr. Young's demonstrate why right-to-farm laws are essential, one professor from UC Davis was quoted saying. As California becomes more urbanized, conflicts between agriculture and residential development will only increase. We need clear legal protections for legitimate farming operations, and we need farmers willing to stand up for those rights. The magazine arrived in December, and I kept a copy framed in my farmhouse, not out of pride exactly, but as a reminder of what I had fought for and why it mattered. Christmas that year was quiet but deeply satisfying. I had a successful harvest season behind me, money in the bank, and plans for expanding in the spring. I hosted a small dinner for friends who had supported me through everything. Marcus and his wife, Uncle Frank, Ellen Martinez from the HOA board, and a few other farmers I'd gotten close to. Over roasted chicken and vegetables from my farm, we toasted to the year ahead. Marcus raised his glass and said, "To Zachary, who proved that sometimes standing your ground is the only option." "To good laws and better lawyers," I countered, and everyone laughed. As 2026 turned to 2027, I reflected on everything that had happened. Buying the farm had been a dream, but that dream had nearly been destroyed by someone who thought her property values mattered more than my legal rights. The fight had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times terrifying. But it had also connected me to resources, people, and a community I might never have found otherwise. The State Agriculture Board's intervention had been crucial. Without Jennifer taking my call seriously and opening an investigation, I might have been steamrolled by Patricia's law firm resources. That one phone call changed everything, bringing state authority to bear on behalf of a small farmer fighting local harassment. Judge Rodriguez's swift dismissal of the lawsuit had been equally vital. A less knowledgeable or decisive judge might have let the case drag on for months, bleeding me dry with legal fees. Her clear understanding of right-to-farm protections and willingness to impose sanctions sent a strong message that frivolous lawsuits wouldn't be tolerated. And the criminal justice system, for all its flaws, had ultimately held Patricia accountable for her escalation to arson. She had paid a real price for her actions: prison time, financial penalties, professional ruin, and exile from the community she claimed to be protecting. The farm thrived in the years that followed. I added chickens and eventually a small herd of goats. The CSA membership grew to over 100 families. The farm stand became a local institution, with people driving from Salinas and even Monterey to buy fresh produce. I hired seasonal workers and eventually brought on a full-time farm manager, allowing me to focus on strategic planning and community outreach. I never forgot the lessons of those difficult months. I kept meticulous records, maintained excellent relationships with county and state agriculture officials, and stayed active in the farming community. I also became an advocate for other farmers facing similar pressures, offering advice and connecting them with resources like the Agriculture Board. 3 years after the original conflict, Ellen Martinez called me with unexpected news. "The HOA board wants to do something for you. We know we can never fully make up for what Patricia put you through, but we'd like to sponsor a community event at your farm, a harvest festival celebrating local agriculture. What do you think?" I considered it carefully. Part of me wanted nothing to do with Meadowbrook Estates, even under new management. But Ellen had been genuinely apologetic and helpful, and the community had changed leadership specifically because of Patricia's actions. "I think that could work," I said finally. "But it needs to be authentic, not some PR stunt to make the HOA look good." "Absolutely," Ellen agreed. "We want to celebrate what you've built and support local farming. Let's plan something meaningful." The first annual Harvest Festival took place in September of that year. Over 300 people attended, including many Meadowbrook Estates residents who had never supported Patricia's campaign. There were farm tours, tastings, educational workshops about sustainable agriculture, and a farm-to-table dinner that sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. Standing on my porch, watching families wander through the fields, children running between rows of corn and parents learning about composting and crop rotation, I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. This was what I had fought for. the right to farm, to contribute to my community, and to share the satisfaction of growing food with others. Marcus attended the festival with his family, and we stood together watching the sunset over the fields. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when you first came to my office, I knew we had a strong case legally, but I wasn't sure you'd see it through. A lot of people would have given up when she started the economic pressure campaign, or definitely after the arson." "Giving up would have meant she won," I said simply. "I couldn't let that happen." "Well, I'm glad you didn't. This place is special. You're doing important work here." The farm continued to grow and evolve. I started offering internships for young people interested in sustainable agriculture, partnered with local schools for educational field trips, and became a vocal advocate for protecting agricultural land from development pressure. The story of standing up to HOA overreach became part of the farm's identity, inspiring others facing similar challenges. 5 years after that first confrontation with Patricia Morrison, I stood in the same spot where she had dropped that initial violation notice at my feet. The corn had grown tall around me, rustling in the breeze. My phone rang. It was Jennifer from the Agriculture Board. "Zachary, I wanted to give you a heads up. We're launching a new initiative to educate HOAs and local governments about agricultural rights. Your case is going to be featured prominently in our training materials. Hope that's okay." "More than okay," I said, watching a hawk circle overhead. "If it helps other farmers avoid what I went through, use it however you need to. You set an important precedent. Right to farm protections only work if people are willing to use them." After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment, letting the reality of it all sink in. I had bought this land to farm, to grow food, to build something meaningful. Patricia Morrison had tried to stop me through harassment, legal intimidation, economic pressure, and ultimately arson. But she had failed. The law had protected me. The community had ultimately supported me. And the farm had not just survived, but thrived. Looking back on everything that happened, I understood that the conflict, as terrible as it was at the time, had strengthened both me and the farm. It had forced me to build relationships with agricultural advocates, legal experts, and fellow farmers. It had taught me to document everything and stand firm on my rights. It had connected me to resources I might never have known existed. The State Agriculture Board taking my call had been the turning point. That single phone call had brought the full weight of California's agricultural protection infrastructure to my defense. It had transformed an isolated farmer being bullied by a wealthy HOA into a test case for right-to-farm laws. And when the smoke cleared, those laws had worked exactly as intended. I walked back toward the farmhouse as evening settled over the land. Tomorrow I would wake before dawn, check on the crops, manage irrigation schedules, and handle the endless tasks that come with farming. But tonight, I would sit on my porch with a cold beer and appreciate everything this place had become. The land stretched out before me, productive and peaceful. Patricia Morrison was somewhere in Oregon, hopefully having learned her lesson. Meadowbrook Estates had moved on with new leadership that respected boundaries, and I was exactly where I belonged, farming land that was legally, rightfully, and undeniably mine to farm. The fight had been worth it. Every stressful moment, every legal filing, every inspection, every confrontation had been worth it to protect this dream and establish a precedent that would help other farmers down the road. I had stood my ground, trusted the law, and prevailed against someone who thought power and money could override legal rights. As darkness fell and stars began appearing overhead, I raised my beer bottle in a silent toast to the Agriculture Board, to Judge Rodriguez, to Marcus, and to everyone who had supported me through those difficult months, and to Uncle Frank, whose simple advice to call the state had changed everything. The farm was mine. The harvest was secure, and no HOA would ever take that away.